Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We've got another exciting call set up for you here with Andy Hoffman from Miles Franklin. Andy, how are you?
Fantastic. Cataclysmic things on the horizon.
Well, on the horizon, and at daybreak here, we're looking at zero hedge, and we're seeing that Ukraine admits its gold is gone. Quote, there's almost no gold left in the central bank vault. There is a small amount of gold bullion left, but it's just 1% of the gold reserves. If you recall reports not long ago of mysterious men in black under the cover of darkness were reported loading gold reserves onto an unmarked plane, which subsequently took the gold to the United States. It's funny, Andy, as we see these banksters tell us that gold is tradition or that it's a barbarous relic, in the words of Warren Buffett, it seems to me that they are preoccupied with hoarding it. Boy, the hits just keep coming from Zero Hedge, too. We see inflation is on the rise, beef prices up 30% year over year. And I wanted to get your take on this. The Japanese stock market is up 17% in just the last month. And standing behind all of this is the upcoming Swiss gold referendum, which I know we're going to talk about in detail. I know you're very passionate about that. Where would you like to start? Should we talk about Japan or should we talk about the Ukraine gold being gone?
Well, we can certainly talk about the Ukraine gold, and I'm not going to speculate exactly what all those stories were about. But the fact is, they allied with the U.S.-led team, and sure enough, their gold is gone. It's no different than Libya or pretty much anywhere that we go. We act like we don't want the gold, but then we wind up doing all these swap agreements, and in this case, outright theft to get a hold of it.
Right.
And my article that came out today, we talk about Switzerland, is called he doth protest too much. The best of Thomas Jordan. Thomas Jordan being the head of the Swiss National Bank, who is on an unprecedented propaganda campaign, which is largely falling on deaf ears because his arguments are so ridiculous. He's calling gold too volatile. He's saying that it doesn't yield anything when Swiss bonds are negative yielding, and he's promising to take them officially negative yielding. So look, across the board, there's a war being fought for the physical gold that's around and for the mental mind share of the world as they seek to remember thousands of years of history against a short-term propaganda and money printing scheme that is clearly in its final stages. And I say that because look what's happening to the currencies around the world, all of them. The BRICS alone, the average BRICS currency is down 60% in the last 3 years since the money printing really took off, and there's inflation everywhere in the system. And now we're seeing secession movements, and of course, the Swiss referendum in a week and a half, which right now it appears the yeses are winning. And I think that the yeses are getting stronger, not weaker, as people realize just how much damage the Swiss bank has done to the nation's finances and credibility.
Yeah, I know you're very passionate about that, Andy. And, the way I look at it is that even if they steal this vote and they tell us that the Swiss people vote no on this referendum to reback their currency with gold, I think that it does not matter in the larger picture. Nothing is going to change as we see Asia hoard gold, the Chinese, the Russians hoarding gold, the BRICS moving away from the dollar. In the big picture, nothing's going to change even if they steal this vote. But I know you're extremely passionate about it, and I think in a recent interview you said something to the effect of the establishment is absolutely quaking in their boots over this referendum, which is probably why they're pulling out all the stops and all the propaganda to try to spin public opinion against it.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to change public opinion. Again, the only public opinion that matters here is the Swiss. The Swiss are not stupid. Again, not every Swiss person is like Ludwig von Mises, but on average, people are well aware that the Swiss National Bank has printed 400 billion Swiss francs in the past 6 years, and they've nearly tripled their balance sheet since the peg has occurred. Since that has occurred, they have now a balance sheet of 80% of GDP compared to 25% of GDP for the United States. They've had an average GDP growth rate of just 0.4% in the last 3 years, meaning they have not gained any market share as a result of weakening the currency. And if you remember earlier this year, they had a referendum that was called what was it called? The decent wage referendum. They wanted to raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour because of the inflation in the country, while the SNB tells them that there's no inflation. So I think people are very, very cognizant of just how bad position they put them in, let alone the credibility of the Swiss National Bank and currency itself. And again, today's article that I wrote is called Splintering. This is just one part of it. It potentially could be the most important near-term part of it, because if there is a yes vote, it's going to bring droves of people into the world of gold again as a monetary asset. But, you look at all the secession movements everywhere. We had them here in the States, which will only pick up in time. But again, there's Scotland, there's Catalonia, where 81% of the people voted to secede, and that's 25% of the tax revenues of a collapsing country to start with. Venice, Italy wants to secede. You have currency wars around the world now because of what's going on with the Japanese, the Bank of Japan and the ECB, et cetera. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are frayed at the edges right now, and I do believe that the Swiss gold referendum, which again, right now, the yeses are in the lead, is potentially a major event around the world. As far as an inflection point in this fiat Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, and it certainly is important as we see Henry Kissinger continue to call for his New World Order. What we are seeing the Swiss do with this referendum is swing the pendulum back towards sovereignty, national sovereignty. Now, of course, there are those in our own government that are willingly trying to give away our sovereignty through things like the TPP. And when I say people in our government, I'm referring to Barack Obama, his cohorts, and unfortunately, some Republicans as well, who appear to be nothing more than globalists. But let me ask you this. Let's get back to Japan. Let's talk about basket case Japan. Because when we talk about national sovereignty, the Japanese certainly are no longer sovereign. They appear to be part of this new world order or this globalist cabal. I've said for a long time now, Andy, that I think Japan has been a proxy state. Fill me in here, but a puppet. Yes, thank you. They've been a puppet of the United States government since World War II. Let's talk about backdoor QE. Let's talk about this Japanese stock market madness, up 17% in 1 month. You've said for a long time that the yen will be the first world Western currency that will suffer hyperinflation. It looks to me like Japan is almost at the point of no return.
Right. And again, it's funny how people like to think that Japan is so much different than the rest of the world. And the only thing that's different is that their population has always been 10 years older. It's what I call the demographic hell. As a result, they had their normal boom-bust cycle of money printing 10 years earlier. That's why their market crashed in 1989 versus 1999 for us, and why their money printing started 10 years earlier, and why they've gotten to the point of no return much quicker. The only thing that they had going for them that we don't have going for them is that when they started their money printing, the world didn't have as much debt. So they were able to build it up while the world still had some capacity for debt. And they obviously took the lion's share of it. But now we're at the point where everyone has reached the peak capacity of debt. They just have more of it. And of course, that demographic hell is only making things worse, especially because they're a major importing nation while at the same time they're hyperinflating their currency. So there's not a thing on the world that's going positively for them right now. And, the stock market doesn't even matter. I mean, look, the Argentina stock market's the best performing stock market in the world. And that nation is on the verge of collapse. The Venezuelan stock market's been a huge gainer. South Africa, which not only has hyperinflation, but the gold industry collapsing, has been a huge stock market. So, the stock market can nominally go up, but in real terms, people are going to get destroyed. But where you're really going to see the collapse in Japan before the other big Western nations is going to be the currency. I mean, people forget it wasn't too long ago when the yen was 300 per dollar, as opposed to today it's 116, and people are going, oh, maybe it'll go to 140. 140. This country is no longer a first world country in my mind. I believe it's going to go back to 300 per dollar, and they will hyperinflate their currency. They have no choice, and you're going to see it. The whole world is going to see what it looks like for an Argentina to happen in a real country like Japan.
Well, let's talk about QE. Let's talk about backdoor QE. If QE really truly ended and the Fed was not monetizing debt, if the Fed was truly withdrawing QE, how do you explain our stock market, the Dow propagandist averages, I think you like to call it, continuing to hit new heights every single day? I mean, if these guys aren't in there propping up the stock market, I don't know who is, Andy. What do you make of QE? Is it really over, or are they just doing backdoor QE through Japan?
Forget Japan. They don't need to do that. Look, first of all, my article the day after was called End of QE LOL. Again, I mean, I can't emphasize enough to people. First of all, I'm not sure why anyone still listens to a word these guys say, given that they've been wrong about everything forever, and the state of the nation has never been worse because of what they've done. But that said, let's say you wanted to try to take them at face value. Nothing computes. I did an article 2 years ago called Proof of the Tapering Mirage, saying, look, here's their footsteps. Their footsteps show that they were queuing twice as much as they said they were. And then, of course, you had the Belgian buyer who came in on top of that, showing that they were printing more.
Right.
But at the same time, sometimes they'll be selling treasuries to try, right now I call it the most damning proof yet of QE failure, which is plunging interest rates in the face of so-called recovery. So I'm watching every single day them try to keep rates up. Not too high, of course, but they don't want it to plummet like in Germany to 1%, so it looks like everything's falling apart. So the point is, the Fed does whatever they want to do to make the market look like it should look, according to them. And, you don't have to look any further. You talk about Dow Jones propaganda average. I wrote about it almost 3 years ago, about the dead ringer algorithm, which means every single day the market bottoms at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, which is when the Fed does its permanent open market operations, i.e. it prints money and injects it into the market. Well, since the end of QE on October 27th, we've had a dead ringer algorithm every single day. It's been about 18 days in a row right now. So anyone who thinks that there's anything different going on with the Fed, let alone to have, as you said, the stock market trading at record levels when the world is collapsing, you got another thing coming.
Well, I want to turn our attention now to gold and silver and the paper manipulation of the precious metals, Andy. And I want to talk specifically about a great piece of commentary from our friend Brother John, who recently released a video called Bid Only as one of his silver updates. And I want to play a snippet of it for you, Andy, right now.
Let's look at it on the weekly. There's your spike. Up to 64 million contracts, and then we're talking about this week so far we're already up to about 16. So we're talking about 80 million contracts. Now, a lot of us have heard about the numbers of the Jeffrey Christian 100 to 1. I've talked about 1,000 to 1. But how big are the numbers? Actually, the numbers are so shockingly big that it's impossible to even to get your mind around it. Let's look at the calculator and think about some of these numbers here. We're talking about in the last week or so, 2 weeks put together. We'll call this the time frame when the mint ran out. We're talking 80 million contracts. That's 5,000 ounces a contract. So we're talking about 400 billion ounces of silver in this time frame.
So, Andy, according to Brother John, who has been a steadfast tracker and pundit about the paper metals manipulation for years now, he's saying that the amount of paper metals they are throwing, particularly with silver, is incalculable. We're talking billions and billions of ounces of paper silver being thrown at this market to suppress the price. With that said, I'd love your comments on that. And the other question I have for you is the bottom in? What do you think?
Well, look, everything, it's just like any other Ponzi scheme. The only way to keep it going is to increase it in greater amounts. Whether it's money printing or the manipulation of markets, et cetera, it takes more and more to keep an elevated stock market at record levels or to keep suppressed precious metals below the cost of production. I mean, look at the gold forward rates and silver forward rates for that matter. I mean, we're talking about levels that you haven't seen in 15 years since before we even had a bull market. So, you're seeing extreme shortages. The mint ran out of silver the other day. They said they'd have 1 million for sale on Monday, and guess how many they sold on Monday? 1 million. So it remains to see where they have any further supply. And again, the mining industry is on the verge of collapse, and I don't say that lightly. As far as I'm concerned, it's already collapsed. Aside from the top companies, no one has cash flow anymore. No one has explored for many, many years. So I think you've already seen peak gold and silver probably forever. And at a time where you are experiencing record physical demand around the world, it's been concentrated principally in the East, but eventually it's going to come on its way to the West, maybe overnight because of the Swiss referendum, or maybe just in time, but it's coming. And, I agree completely that if you believe the structure of the COMEX, it's horrible, but it's probably even worse. If it's not what they say it is, it's far worse.
Yeah, and I want to talk just a bit about peak silver. We said this before. It warrants mentioning again, Andy, with the silver to gold ratio hovering around somewhere 70 to 75 to 1. It's absolute insanity. Peak physical silver, I think, truly is here as we look at the mining ratios of the precious metal silver, AG, being mined out of the ground every year, being closer to 9, 10 to 1 for every ounce of gold that's found. And we know that the demand, the use of silver with industrial uses and investor demand is outrunning the annual production by at least 100,000, 200,000 ounces a year. They only mine about 800 million ounces of the stuff out of the ground annually, Andy. And, if you want to take a look at how insane that is, my friend the Wealth Watchman just wrote an article where he says Americans in this country, just in this country, spend $307,000 per minute just on coffee. It's $162 billion a year just on coffee. Now take a look at the annual silver market with, say, 1 billion ounces times $20 an ounce. It's a $20 billion market. It's just insanity for silver to be trading this low and at a ratio of 75 to 1.
Well, there's a reason that I call it the financial the Achilles heel of the financial world, because it's such a small market that it wouldn't take much for it to break out and cause the mass inflation fears, and of course the shortages, which we've seen in 2008, 2011, 2013, and now 2014. I mean, it's clearly going to be a major issue, particularly like we saw in 2008, where the mints ran out for months at a time. Sometime in the near future. I mean, the industrial demand is extremely inelastic. And frankly, as you said, because the size of the market, it doesn't matter. It wasn't industrial demand that made the price go from $5 to 50. It was investment demand. The industrial demand just happens to be another factor which makes it that much more valuable. And as for peak silver, look, we did our Miles Franklin Silver All-Star webinar a few weeks ago. I mean, we all agreed that at the current prices, we probably see in the next few years up to a 50% decline in global silver production. And and for those people who say, well, yeah, but some of it is base metal byproduct, or a lot of it is. But the fact is, has anyone taken a look at the base metal prices? They are collapsing as well. And they're going to go further down because the global economy is falling apart, and there's not a single aspect of nickel or aluminum or copper that has any monetary value. So I do believe that certainly in peak gold we've already seen it, and as for peak silver, if we haven't seen it this year, look up 2 or 3 years from now and you'll be shocked. And look, people don't realize in the United States and Canada, silver production is down something like 50% in the last decade. And the rest of the world isn't going to be far behind.
Well, as we wrap up this conversation, Andy, I do want to just touch on the big picture, and then you can comment on any of these things. But I just did an interview with my friend Harley Schlanger from LaRouche recently, and he was talking about the Bank of International Settlements bail-in bonds and the fact that things are so bad in the world of the international banks that at the highest level, the Bank of International Settlements is now arranging for these bail-in bonds to be sold to pensioners, and they're just going to fleece the people now. They've already been fleecing the people, but when we talk about the real value of 1 ounce of physical silver or 1 ounce of physical gold, let's rewind history and let's remind people that when the banksters took us away from our paper money, and there was a time when these banks had precious metals in the vault, they realized real quickly that most people were going to be okay having that paper certificate. And so what they started to do was they sold gold out the back door, and they would have only a fraction of the gold on hand because they knew most people would never come and redeem their certificates for their gold, right? Well, now it's so bad, Andy, that not only is there no gold or silver in your local bank, it's so bad now that if there were a run on the banks for people going in just trying to get their cash, There's nowhere near enough cash in the system or in the bank vaults to redeem everyone who would be asking for their savings or checking account balances in cash. That's how bad it is. Used to be they had gold and silver, they got rid of that. Now they don't even have enough cash to redeem in the instance of a bank run. That's how bad things are. So as we wrap up, why don't you just leave us with your words of wisdom, because I'm telling you, I think it's far, far worse behind the scenes than we can even imagine.
Well, put it this way. As I said, my article coming out today is called Splintering, and it's not just about the secession movements. It's generally speaking, the system is falling apart. You're seeing the chinks in the armor. The case in point, you can't have two more powerful statements than one, Alan Greenspan spending the last month on a tour where he basically tries to whitewash his legacy, saying QE doesn't work and gold is the only real money. Because he knows that the system that he participated in is dying and he's trying to distance himself from it. On that note, just yesterday, the guy named Koichi Hamoda, he's the architect of Abenomics, he came out and called Abenomics a Ponzi scheme and said it's going to failure because he too doesn't want to be blamed. And best of all, the last thing I'm going to leave you with is absolutely amazing. Even I am still astonished. I wrote about it yesterday and today for this very reason. A guy named Yves Marsh, he's a Luxembourg guy who's on the ECB governing board. He came out yesterday and said the ECB may consider buying gold if it needs to get inflation up. And I could not believe if there's anything that shows how the system is splintering is that, because not only is he attacking his benefactors at the Fed and attacking the Swiss National Bank's propaganda scheme at its moment of weakness, but he's even attacking the ECB itself, kind of almost making it impossible for QE to go forward. Because if there's a widespread belief that gold is what needs to be purchased, then the whole system falls apart. And so again, I don't think it's going to take much for the system to finally really explode at the seams. And it just may be the Swiss referendum next week.
Yeah, I saw that news item too, and I think you're right, Andy. I think it's a case of the rats leaving a sinking ship, because the ECB and the Federal Reserve have been as thick as thieves. And we know from Ron Paul's audit of the Fed, a great deal, trillions of dollars in fact, went to the ECB and to other central banks and to international banksters. And I think at the end of the day, Andy, as we've talked about so much, so often, there is hope. You can have a dark, dark cave, a dark room of blackness, and one match will dissipate that darkness. And I think we are seeing a rise of liberty, a demand for sovereignty. We're seeing the people rise in anger against these banksters, and that's just the best, most hopeful sign I can imagine. And I do think the day will come when these dollars inflate away into nothing, and those left holding precious metals in physical form will retain their liberty and have a future.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Great minds think alike. I wrote exactly that about the rats leaving the sinking ship, and I even enclosed a little video from Titanic of them doing that same thing. And for that matter, also agreeing with you completely. And my audio blog last week was called Revenge of the People. For the first time in years, I actually have some hope that the people might take things into their hand. And as I wrote about in Call to the Swiss, there's a chance here to destroy this evil empire with the pen rather than the sword, and I'm very excited about it, whether it's in Switzerland or somewhere else.
Well, I'm getting goosebumps, Andy, because I'm really excited about it too. I truly am. This is, I think, one of the most powerful conversations we've ever had, because for the first time, we're both seeing the cup as half full. And I think that's a harbinger of great things to come potentially for humanity. The BRICS are leading the way, and to hell with this debt-based fiat nightmare cabal in charge of our central bank and our government, essentially, because the people will rise. Andy, thanks so much for spending the last half hour with us. We sure do appreciate your work and your voice. And why don't you tell people, if they want to do business with you guys at Miles Franklin to get physical precious metals, tell them how to do that, will you?
Right. Remember, we're in our 25th year of business, A+ Better Business Bureau rating. Call us at 800-822-8080 or email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com. And of course, if you're looking to store metal overseas, I think our BRICS program in Montreal, Canada is the industry's best.
Andy, I just want to thank you again for your time. Again, I got goosebumps during this one because we covered a lot and we covered it with passion, and we are documenting the collapse. So thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Guys, thank you for listening, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for supporting us at sgtreport.com and thelibertymill.com. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. Thanks for all your support. Have a terrific week ahead, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.